Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the moment of truth. Oh, say it ain't so. I can't believe this. It's impossible. Caitlyn Clark, the greatest female college basketball player of all time, or so we've been told, has lost the national championship game. How could this happen? It's impossible. It couldn't possibly happen. Except it's exactly what happened last year, so I guess it's not so strange after all, right? Well, I tried to tell you. Now hands up, who seriously thought that Caitlyn Clark was going to go all the way? I didn't, because I didn't even know who this woman was until last year, and now once again she's close but no cigar. And she's once again returning to the obscurity from which the white media temporarily plucked her. For those who follow women's college basketball, the white media was coronating Caitlyn Clark like she was the second coming of Michael Jordan or something. They were just hyping her up, positioning her as the greatest thing to happen to basketball since basketball. They were all ready for her to win a national championship, to call her the queen of basketball. Hell, they were already doing that. And if she had won a national championship, I can promise you, she would be the lead story on every white sports network and publication from now until next year. You see, the hype was the point, not because it was real, but because of the white media's total dominance. They have the ability to turn their fiction into your reality, or at least to give it some thin veneer of credibility. Look, I don't really know anything about Caitlyn Clark, so I'm not here to dog her out, but I am here to say what the white media's instant infatuation with her represents. We all know that before the days of Jack Johnson, the white media has always been looking for a great white hope. White supremacy is based on the lie of black inferiority. Having been systematically deprived of monetary resources, the main, and in most cases only thing black people have to offer is our human resources. That is what we can do with our minds and what we can do physically. And that's been enough for us to dominate sports and music. And so we see the most virulent and vicious attacks against black people in those arenas. The headlines of the white media is manufactured about Caitlyn Clark so they could try to prop her up and hype her up. Those headlines have been so convoluted as to be comedy gold. They do so much reaching to fabricate laudatory headlines about her, they might as well call themselves Plastic Man. For instance, the white media said that Clark surpassed Steph Curry's three-point record. Now, you read a headline like that, and you think that this means his NBA record, which any sane person would know is not possible, and you would be right. She didn't surpass Curry's NBA anything. Instead, what this piece is talking about is that she allegedly surpassed Steph Curry's college three-point record. The only honest comparison you can make between Steph Curry and Caitlyn Clark's college careers is that both of them failed to win their championship games. They also made a comparison between Clark's record and some guy named Maravich. So am I to believe that the girls Caitlyn Clark plays against are in the same category as Steph Curry or Shaquille O'Neal when he played college ball, or Michael Jordan back in the day? Because if the girls in college ball are as physical and accurate as the men, then you can make a comparison. But if not, you can't. But you had the usual clowns ready to crown this little snowflake as the GOAT of women's basketball if she wins the NCAA championship. That's what ESPN was saying. Oh yeah, leading the charge to say she's the GOAT.
A national championship this season would make Caitlyn Clark the greatest college basketball player of all time. She has men's and women's records and won championship. To me, Molly, winning multiple championships is the sign of a great program. Winning one is the sign of a great player. You only have 4 years to do it.
Did you hear what she said?
She has men's and women's records and won championship.
That she's won men and women's records and championship? Correct me if I'm wrong, but Caitlyn Clark doesn't have any championships. That's the entire reason why it was so important that on her way out the door that she tries to get some last-minute championship now, because she failed to do so for the 5 previous years that she had been playing. So what's this championship stuff? The white media is just making stuff up about her, claiming these non-existent championships for her. She has a championship. No, she doesn't. Oh, and do you hear that crap she says about winning multiple championships means a great program?
To me, Molly, winning multiple championships is the sign of a great program. Winning one is the sign of a great player.
Well, I guess in that case, then Michael Jordan isn't the greatest of all time. It's the Chicago basketball team. They're the greatest of all time. It's the Bulls program that's the greatest of all time. not Michael Jordan, right? I mean, look at the freaking verbal gymnastics they have to go through just so they can make up for the fact that she ain't brought home the gold once. If she can just win one championship, she's the greatest of all time. Talk about putting the bar on the floor.
And I am not an expert in women's college basketball, so I am in no position to challenge you. But damn it, I'm going to try anyway. Let's talk about Cheryl Miller for a second. Cheryl Miller.
Okay.
All right, the sister of Reggie Miller. I'm looking at some numbers here. A two-time national champion, two-time NCAA tournament most outstanding player, obviously a three-time Naismith Award winner, okay, four-time All-American. I'm like, come on now. I don't know if I can summarily dismiss that. Don't get me started with my girl Diana Taurasi. I mean, it would be
Now
blasphemous for me not to mention that three-time national champion at UConn, okay? It would be blasphemous for me to mention. That girl could shoot. She got ball handling skills. She's got moxie. She's got toughness. She's got a lot of components that you are far more qualified than me. As Diana Taurasi, that's my all-time favorite. Brianna Stewart, I can't forget the fact that she won a championship each and every single year in college. Four-time champion.
You know, when Stephen Smith of all people sounds less stupid than your other panelists, that's how you know you done messed up. I was sure that Stephen Smith was going to be the one talking the most stupidity. Instead, he was talking the least. So that just goes to show how overboard the white media is going to try to make Caitlyn Clark into something that she's clearly not. They were just so eager. Oh, they just figured to themselves, law of averages has to kick in at some point. If she just keeps on playing long enough, sooner or later, law of averages will kick in, and she's got to win a championship at some point, right? Wrong. Well, she didn't win, so what does that make her? A two-time loser, that's what. And since Angel Reese actually did bring home the hardware last year, what does that make her? Calling Caitlyn Clark the GOAT? Really? For what? The white media is already trying to do damage control now that she's flopped for the second time in a row, and she lost to a black basketball team. Imagine that. Is nothing sacred. But the white media is now trying to clean up the mess. They got egg all over their faces, so what they're saying is, Caitlyn Clark lost the championship, but she's grown the sport. Really? So nobody was watching women's college basketball before she came along? These are the lies the white media has to tell because their years-long attempts to try to manufacture this great non-black athlete has failed. ESPN's website had the nerve to use the word legacy when talking about Caitlyn Clark. You know, unless legacy is preceded by the words she wishes she had a before it, then you're pushing a lie. Caitlyn Clark's legacy is that she was hyped and pumped up in the white media 2 years in a row because she's not black. That's it. Her legacy is that the white media bet all their chips on her twice, and 2 times she's become a 2-time loser. So now they're trying to claim that she made people watch the game. If that's true, and I don't concede that it is, but even if the white media's take was true, is it really due to Caitlyn Clark being some sort of big basketball phenom that she just draws people's eyeballs? Clearly she's not the great second coming of anything. Or is it more likely because the white media fell over themselves to invent a narrative around her and to make her out to be the next big thing when she turned out to be the next big nothing? All the attention the white media gave to her, it's only natural that some people were going to tune in to see what all the hype's about. And again, these are the same white media pundits who are quick to remind you that men's and women's sports are 2 entirely different animals, that you can't really compare the two. That's why we don't let the male and female teams play against each other. These are the exact same people in the white media who ordinarily would be the first to point out that you can't actually compare the men and women's divisions of any sport. And yet here they are making a direct comparison between Caitlyn Clark and these male players as if it's the same thing.
She has men's and women's records.
Now, is this nonsense clickbait? Of course it is. But at this point it tiptoes toward fraud. Caitlyn Clark is an invention of the white media and certain white supremacist ideologues who are not just desirous of a great white hope in sports. At this point, they're desperate. And everything that's been said about her was meant to forward a particular narrative. She was never that great. She's a professional choke artist. She chokes when it really matters. And let's be bluntly honest. Were Caitlyn Clark black, would she be getting any of this insincere praise from the white media? And if Angel Reese was white, Would she be getting any criticism at all, especially if she was the one who won the championship and she beat a black player to do it? Do you think the white media would be saying that the black player was the GOAT? No. Let's be honest here. Angel Reese beat and humiliated Clark last year in a dominant victory, and the white media attacked Angel Reese rather than praise her. But Angel Reese can always say she won a national championship. Caitlyn Clark rode the wave that real ballers like Angel Reese created. And we always have this double standard going on. Caitlyn Clark was celebrated when just 2 months ago she announced that she was going to leave college and go join the WNBA. Oh, and apparently she's supposed to be getting a $5 million contract. Well, what a great thing for the WNBA, we were told. Because the girl who lost the championship last year and who lost it again just last night is now looking to go pro. And while you've had white media commentators and white college athletics figures whining about black athletes and the name, image, likeness money that they stand to get, they're celebrating Caitlyn Clark's NIL money. So it's only a problem if it's black people who are getting paid. So last night, Caitlyn Clark had a chance to show everybody whether or not she truly was a GOAT. She'll never be the anything, but she at least had a second chance to show whether or not she could actually seal the deal. And what she showed everybody was, no, this is what you can expect from her. Just like last year, 2 times in a row, Caitlyn Clark, when it's time for her to get on the big stage, she chokes. That's what she showed everybody. Some clowns are, or was it were, calling Caitlyn the best women's college player ever. Keep in mind, it's usually very young people who try that line. These are the same people who think that Avengers Endgame is the best movie of all time. When you tell me that the most recent white media sensation is the greatest ever, what you're really telling me is you don't know anything. Where are the clowns who constantly tell black athletes that they're arrogant or entitled or aren't grateful? Caitlyn Clark does her own corny, knock-kneed, corny, unintentionally silly, corny version of black swag. Did I mention she's corny as Kansas? Where are the people who constantly whine about black athletes and saying, look at some of that stuff that they're doing, their antics are really unbecoming of the game? Caitlyn Clark does the same stuff and they don't say anything. They're nowhere to be found because it's not about whatever alleged conduct the black athletes have done. It's about people who see sports as their own place to attack the black community by proxy, by attacking black athletes under the flimsy guise that it's just sports criticism. But now, with what they thought was going to be the white athlete who was going to be winning a championship, they thought that they could finally drop the pretenses, let the mask slip, and say what they really thought. To them, she's nothing more than a straw man, an avatar that they can use to push the lie that she's a hero for white conservatives in particular because she's a straight white woman, and also an oppressed white woman in a predominantly black sport because all these black folks are holding her back. Now, why are we hearing about race? Especially from the same people who claim that there's no racism at all. There's no racism in American society. Nobody's holding you back. Well, nobody's holding Caitlyn Clark back. Nobody's discriminating against her. Hell, she's been celebrated for what I don't know. All of a sudden, you got people trying to say, the WNBA, they're being racist against her. She's not even in the WNBA yet. A little early to be claiming that the black players are somehow discriminating against her, don't you think? Spoiler, nobody wants a whiner. They want a winner. Problem is, Caitlyn Clark doesn't win. She's only good enough to make it to a championship, but there's no trophy for second place. She's a loser who will always be remembered as having lost not once, but twice. And no amount of white media hype is going to cover that one up. And when she gets to the WNBA, her stats aren't going to change. She comes off as a cocky punk, and that doesn't wear well in college sports. Now, when you go pro, there's even less patience for it. It would have been one thing if she was coming into the WNBA with at least a college championship ring. She would at least have had an accolade, but instead she's coming in with back-to-back national losses. Now, who's supposed to respect that? Does she think that basketball is going to get any easier when she goes to play in the pros? Apparently her phony online boosters do. And now that she's lost for the second time in a row, will they still be pretending to praise her? Or will they treat her like every other great white hope who they used as a stalking horse to attack black people? Conservatives loved Ron DeSantis until he kept losing primary after primary, and now those same right-wing nuts are busy looking for the next loudmouth racist who they can get behind. And that's how you know the bad guys have lost. Not by them admitting that they're beat, but by the sound of their silence. These are the same people who attack Title IX, by the way, and constantly say that schools don't need to be mandating that money be set aside for women's sports. And all of a sudden these people love women's college basketball? No. The biggest victims are the people who use racial privilege. Society hands someone everything and does so for hundreds of years. You get called the best simply because you showed up. It's putting the bar on the ground and then demanding that everybody applaud when you merely trip over it. Caitlyn Clark hasn't won a single championship. Last night she lost again to another black team. South Carolina spanked her. It was basically last year's defeat all over again. She got cocky because her team seemed to be winning initially, but the opposing team rallied in the second half and showed her that only playing 2 quarters of basketball ain't enough. You could see the online bigots warming up their insults. They were so sure she was going to win, they figured that with LSU no longer in contention, that Caitlyn Clark, the Great White Hope, was a shoo-in to have that national championship. Gee, I detect a pattern forming here, but apparently the white media doesn't. So they can't read or count. I want all the fools who were boosting Caitlyn Clark up until 12 hours ago to step up now. All the people saying she was the GOAT. Go ahead and say it now. We could use a good laugh. They didn't call Steph Curry the GOAT when he was in college. They didn't do that for Michael Jordan either. This wasn't about what Caitlyn Clark is, it was about what the white media wanted you to think she is. So, now that she's going into the WNBA as a 2-time national championship loser, isn't it time to admit that maybe Caitlyn Clark's a little overrated? I mean, how many losses does she have to rack up before her phony pretend supporters admit that she's not really all that? How many times do we have to go through this before they quit? With the dominance of black athletes, every few years we get subjected by white sports reporters to some new white athlete who they say is going to be the next big thing, and they're doing it directly as a refutation of black athletic excellence. Tim Tebow was supposed to silence all those people who were celebrating the rise of black quarterbacks in the NFL. He, of course, fell through, and he's been left behind as the white media goes looking for the next non-black GOAT. And when that falls through, they go looking for the next, and the next, and the next. It was just Caitlyn Clark's turn, that's all. Oh, and before we go any further, some racist commentators are saying that Caitlyn Clark's got a big payday coming when she gets to the WNBA. Again, this is typical of how these sports leagues reward and pay non-black athletes far above what the black athletes who actually bring in the viewership and the championships get. Now, we just had the LA Times indulge in blatant open racism not against just one player, but against an entire team. So you know that they were rooting for Caitlyn Clark, and now that she's lost for the second time in a row, will any of them have the courage to examine why she keeps fumbling the ball? Of course not. She's an avatar for themselves. As I said in my last briefing about this last week, when these racist reporters look at Caitlyn Clark, they see their own sisters, daughters, girlfriends, etc. And that's what she represents to them. What they don't see, though, is a national champion. And where are the articles going to be at that Caitlyn Clark needs to think twice before telling people you don't see me? That she was classless as hell for her actions. At least Angel Reese got the championship ring. I'm predicting that in due time, the white media is going to turn on Caitlyn Clark. They actually have a track record of doing that. Whenever some great white hope fails to bring home the victory, the white media wants to make it clear they don't forgive failure. So yeah, before it's all over, I think the white media is going to be trashing Caitlyn Clark. They're certainly going to be going back to the steady drumbeat of women's sports, especially college sports, don't bring in the same numbers as the men's. Why are we sitting here wasting our time on this? Angel Reese has also announced that she intends to go to the WNBA. The difference between her and Caitlyn Clark being she's going to have a championship ring before she gets there. No one's going to be talking about whether or not the black girl who actually does have the college championship title should be getting $5 million. Will she be getting more than Caitlyn Clark? No, instead what we're going to be hearing is, well, Caitlyn Clark brought in a whole lot of viewers when she was playing in college. Well, this is talking about the pros. She ain't brought in viewer number 1. So that's irrelevant. But all the fools who are hyping her up, don't stop now. Keep on telling us how she's the GOAT of women's college basketball. Keep telling us that she's the only reason people watched women's college basketball, because now that she's gone, I'm sure that the numbers are going to fall into the toilet, and they're certainly not going to be anywhere near this level anytime in the future, right? While I'm sure that there's a lot of racists who are only too happy to see a non-black player who can make a few points, the truth is they'll be heaping unearned accolades on some other player next year. Black athletes have to set scoring records and bring home championships just to get half as much praise and a quarter as much money as other people get just for being the right skin color. So for all the Caitlyn Clark fans out there, cheer up. Your girl is indeed the GOAT. That is, if GOAT stands for getting owned all the time. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Suleiman Alaji, Miss Debbie, Richard Griffith, Cedric Etheridge, and Teresa Davis. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.